I don't remember how long it's been. How many times have I told you our story? I asked shakily. My resolve was wavering. A beautiful goldfish swam in a small gold-encased glass bowl. The bowl sat upon a small wooden side table. The table sat next to an old handmade leather chair. The fish was obsidian black with burning red, crimson eyes. He gazed at me with an unyielding rage, a hatred that was palpable. Down the spine of his back were 2 large scars. "Keep looking at me that way, I'll pull out another fin," I said mockingly. I winked towards the fish. The fish had 6 beautiful fins which flowed and swayed in an invisible current. They looked like black silk curtains wafting and dancing in a gentle midsummer breeze. It was a breathtaking fish, almost enchanting. The fish watched every one of my moves as I paced. Was I wrong to choose this for us? I thought. Anxiety was swelling in my chest. A loud howl interrupted my thoughts. Curiously, I stopped pacing and walked towards the front door. I opened it slowly. A large, dark purple wolf came tumbling in at full speed. It tripped over its own feet and crashed into the dining room table. I laughed as I watched in slow motion. The beast's jawline flattened against the wood surface. The poor wolf had been panting. When his face hit the table, the wolf bit his tongue. I heard a slight whimper escape its jowls. It made me laugh harder. I turned to look at the fish. I swear, I saw a bubble or 2 escape its mouth. As if it also couldn't help but let out a chuckle. I turned my focus to the wolf. It was now pulling itself up. A deep-throated growl reverberated through the room. The wolf slowly turned to face the fish. It crept towards the bowl. It growled louder the closer it got. Its nose pressed the glass and huffed. Fog temporarily blocked the fish from view. I could see the wolf's reflection in the glass. The wolf's left eye was burning like molten gold. Where his right eye should have been was a socket sealed shut by a scar. His fur was like the night, dark but warm. Its muscles bulged as it stood. Its tail was nearly 2.5 feet long. He was 9 feet long from nose to tail. While standing on all 4 paws, he stood at a height of 5 feet and 3 inches. I snapped out of my admiration and clapped my hands. "Welcome home, Fenrir," I praised. I ran over and rushed my fingers through the giant creature's fur. It was warm and calming. It helped me pull myself together, and I took a deep breath. Fenrir barked and jumped up and down. The weight of him shook the hut. The wolf fell to the floor with a flop and rolled over onto its back. It exposed its belly and chirped playfully as it squirmed back and forth. "Oh, did someone make big poops?" I laughed and cheered. Fenrir barked and I bent down to praise him. "Glad you're home, buddy. I was close to losing it there," I said softly. I got up and picked up the dining room table. The commotion had knocked the treasures I had there onto the ground. I hadn't noticed them in a very long time. There were 2 beaded necklaces. One had a beautiful ivory carved cross in the center. The other had a cross made of ebony. Father Felipe and Sister Grace, I hope you two are rolling around on every cloud they have up there. I blushed and a perverted grin grew on my face. I giggled at the memories of Father Felipe, the way he carried his coffin on his back yet stood so confident and tall. I bent down and picked the rosaries up and set them back onto the dining room table. I looked around for more of the items and noticed a leather-bound book. I grabbed it and blew the dust from the cover. A pentagram embedded in silver poked out of the leather. The leather was made from the skin of a long-forgotten fallen angel. I barely touched the book up and instinctively ducked. Fear encompassed me and a shiver shot down my spine. "I'm sorry," I squeaked. Fenrir had been slurping water desperately out of the fish's bowl. He acted like he needed every drop to survive dehydration. Because of the nature of the bowl being an eternal prison, the amount of water that would reappear in the bowl made it seem like an endless ocean. Fenrir turned his attention towards me. I saw his golden eye focus on the book and then on me. A moment of clarity came over the wolf's face and it pulled a paw up to its mouth. He began to snort as if laughing at me. Shut up. It's still so weird that she would leave this with us. Besides, you know full well how scary she could be, I said, arguing. Fenrir nodded in agreement and for a moment looked scared himself. He got up and walked towards the rug in front of the fireplace and laid down. He kicked at the rug for a moment as if to clear the dirt off of it and then circled the rug a few times. Once it was to His Majesty's high standard, he plopped down with a snort and his tongue rolled out from behind his fangs. In moments Fenrir was sound asleep. I turned back to the last few items and let the joy of my friend's memories wash over me. I picked up a leather eye patch. Embroidered into the patch in gold silk was a man with two hawks sitting on his shoulders. Thank you for everything, old fool. You were like a grandfather, Odin, I said sadly. To think my people got you so wrong. I set the eye patch down gently on top of the book. My mind wandered to how fierce and scary Odin was in battle. I turned back to the floor and picked up a black bow tie and a small gold bell attached to a red ribbon. Impson, thank you for always watching over Agatha. I spoke. I placed the bow tie down next to the book and clutched the bell between my fingers. Oh, Momo. I mumbled. I rubbed the scar on my cheek. You are completely and forever forgiven. I never thought we would become such good friends. I truly hope you were shown mercy, I whispered. A sinking feeling gripped my stomach. I felt dizzy. I turned to make my way to my grandfather's chair when my foot kicked the tiny mirror which remained untied from the floor. It slid across the cracked dusty floor of our old Nordic hut and slipped out of sight underneath a wood cabinet. I hadn't noticed the bright white light that now shined brightly from the glass of the mirror. A slight vibration emanated from the object for a moment. The light dimmed and the faint hum faded. I slapped the fish bowl as I sat down in the chair. It rolled over and a wave of water fell onto the floor. Fenrir crawled over and licked it up. I sighed and put the bowl upright back on the table. Water rushed from the gates of the replica Valhalla and rescued the fish. The fish was chillingly calm. It was eerie the way the fish's body reflexively flopped as it waited for water to fill its gills. I hate to admit it, but it's not as fun pushing you around these days, I said playfully towards the fish. You sure you don't want to be friends? I asked seriously. The water around the fish began to boil. The glass, encased in gold, began to glow a molten hot red. The waters rushing from Valhalla was evaporating as soon as it met the atmosphere around the fish. The bowl shook violently on the table, and slowly lifted itself into the air. It floated slowly up to my face. The fish had a devilish grin under its crimson flaming eyes. An uncanny set of teeth was revealed to me. Fenrir, grab a Behemoth, I said sternly. Fenrir didn't even bother opening his eye. At the threat of me grabbing my scythe, the fish calmed, the air in the bowl cooled and the waters were allowed to flow. The waters refilled the bowl, and the fish slowly sank towards the replica castle. It began to sit on top the highest tower and crossed its fins. Well, Tyrell Larson, a well-spoken voice said. It sounded proud and arrogant. The fish was still smiling and slowly raised its tiny fins in a grand reveal. You were the first to be buried in the graveyard here. You, along with Fenrir, became this village's church grim. How did you die? Why did death wake you? Tell me, one more time. The fish spoke. Its voice was enchanting. I took my seat and crossed my legs. I folded my arms and took a deep breath. Replay it all you want. Nothing can free you from that prison now. I laughed. Fenrir joined in barking and howling. We'll see, Grim. The fish hissed. He clapped his fins together in a sarcastic way. Start from the day your father sold Fenrir to the church. Tell me about the day you died. Something other than humor must have caught Death's eye. The fish's voice boomed with anger. Fine. That is my job after all, I said, rolling my eyes. I locked them onto the fish and recounted the events of that day. I was 15 when I died. We had just celebrated Fenrir's 4th birthday a few nights before. My father had seemed a little more cheerful than normal. My mother was in the kitchen making us some rabbit stew. It was Fenrir's favorite meal. To steal from my plate. I remember we laughed a lot that night. Fenrir and I went to bed with full bellies and renewed energy. It wasn't often a day would be bright around here, and we enjoyed them while we could. I remember having a very vivid dream that night. I was walking through the meadow where I first met Fenrir as a pup. It was daytime and the sun reflected magnificent lights from the stone in the center. The stone had raw gold and silver and other precious metals that poked from the grains of its coarse shell. Countless gems cast every color from the rainbow onto the trees. I walked mesmerized by the sight. Suddenly, the light was gone. The clearing was shrouded in black. I heard what sounded like fingers snapping and the stone lit up again. There was no sun or stars to cast a light. The stone was illuminated like a lit candle. The colors danced and flashed around the meadow. The snapping became rhythmic, and I felt my feet move on their own. I began to dance shyly to myself, entranced by the sound. The colors cheered me on, and the shyness began to melt away from me. The snapping stopped and pitch-black darkness again enveloped the meadow, but only for a moment. The stone lit up again suddenly, but this time it only cast a single gentle white light towards a cluster of trees. Slowly the snapping picked up again and I heard birds begin to sing. I could hear drips, as water fell from leaves. There was a faint sound of chirping from squirrels scurrying just out of sight. All the sounds of nature fused together to form a symphony. I became enveloped in the music and any nervous feelings I had vanished. I danced without a care in the world. I didn't even see the woman dance her way into the clearing from behind the lit-up trees. She made her way towards me. She danced with the grace of an angel. Every detail of her movements was carefully choreographed. She grabbed me by the hand, and we spun around the clearing. She guided me through a dance. My body just seemed to know the moves too. I was overwhelmed with emotions. This was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was short, 5 foot 5 inches. Her skin was very pale. She was thin and wore a long beautiful laced white dress. It flowed with her movement as she moved. Her eyes were a dark crimson red and looked into mine with the sorrow of an unfathomable number of horrors. A single red thread wove in and out of her flesh from the top of her head down her face and neck. It laced her skin shut on her chest just above her chest. It danced and snaked its way in and out of the white fabric of her dress. My imagination wandered as I followed the thread, down her legs. She was barefoot yet danced unscathed. She leaned in and whispered something in my ear before I woke up. She was in so much pain, yet she grabbed me by the hand and guided me. I laughed. I didn't notice while recalling the dream, but tears were streaming down my face. I looked at the fish who looked back at me puzzled. "Fate, you whore of a sister, what have you done?" the fish asked. His voice just for a second sounded shaky. He regained his composure and the smile returned across the fish's face. "I bet you had your first wet dream that night," the fish laughed. I heard Fenrir bark quietly to himself, as if laughing. "Oh ha, ha, ha," I said as coldly as possible. I couldn't help but blush. Damn fish, he can never know he was right, I thought. The fish spoke again. "Tyrell, please, continue. What happened after your wet dream?" The fish smiled. I continued my tale. I woke up earlier than normal. It was weirdly silent in the house and Fenrir wasn't laying next to my bed. I snapped out of my sleepy morning fog and had an idea of what happened. I had been hearing rumors in the village about how the priests were looking for a great beast. They had a belief. The first soul to be buried in dirt and sealed by a stone would be cursed. They would become the church's grim and would be forced to protect their lands, until the trumpets of Judgment Day. My father was our village chief and was close with the priests. My mind raced and I jumped out of bed. I ran out the door and grabbed a sickle used for weeding. It was leaning against an ancient stump. I ran through the village. I was so focused on my fears that I didn't notice if anyone else was awake yet. I ran until I got to the church. Construction was finished, and the graveyard needed a soul. I got to the gate which led into the graveyard and saw my parents. They were standing a few feet away from Fenrir, next to a hole dug in the ground. Two priests were holding Fenrir, who wasn't resisting at all. The good boy trusted my parents and they led him to his death. Fury fueled my steps, and I ran faster. I remember calling out just as the head priest slit Fenrir's throat. The blood-curdling howl I heard disoriented me. I tripped and landed face first onto the blade of my sickle. I remember hearing my parents call out as I felt my body be enveloped in blood. The last thing I saw was Fenrir desperately trying to break free to come rescue me. I don't know if it was the sickle piercing my throat, or if a lump formed from how heartbreaking it was to watch Fenrir struggle. I told the beautiful black fish before wrapping up. For what feels like an eternity I slept, except there was no thought, no dreaming, no consciousness, just sleep. I don't know how long it had been, but the sound of laughter woke me up. Tripped and impaled yourself on a farming tool. You were flailing and yelling like you truly believed you were some sort of hero. The laughing grew louder. I blinked and looked upon the face of the most breathtaking man I had ever seen. His skin was paler than the moon and he stood tall and slender. Long lanky arms reached out and pointed at me. He was dressed in all black and wore what looked like half of a human skull on the right side of his face. His right eye pierced through the socket of the skull. A crimson red, staring at the man filled me with curiosity. The man began to saunter around flamboyantly and continued to laugh. "Oh, Fenrir, I'm coming. Oh no, am I tripping? Oh oopsies. Dead. Oh no, unresolved mummy and daddy issues. However will I solve them now? Oh, the tragedy." He leaned back and laughed even louder. He brought his bony hand up and covered his mouth. I could see his cheeks blushing behind it. I finally pulled myself together and spoke out to him. "Who are you?" I asked. "Names, death," he replied. "And you just died the funniest death I have ever seen. I just had to wake you up to shake your hand, get your signature for my collection." He laughed. A loud bang stopped my story as the fishbowl slammed into the wall of the cabin. It rose and floated towards me like it had earlier. The water was boiling completely now. The black fish sat on the top of the Valhalla replica. His red eyes pierced me to my core. "Are you sitting cross-finned?" I laughed. I walked over and plucked the bowl out of the air. I set him back down on the table. "A bit dramatic, don't you think?" I laughed. The fish appeared to sigh and then relaxed. He began to swim again, and the boiling water calmed. "Fenrir, let's go for a walk," I whistled. I grabbed the fishbowl and placed it back into the leather pouch I kept on my belt. "Swim back and relax. We're about to tell you the story of how we ended your reign and broke God's endless cycle. One more time," I said joyfully. I walked over to the dining room table and gathered the items and placed them into the leather pouch. I noticed the mirror was missing and panic washed over me. I looked all over and finally found the mirror underneath a cabinet. As I reached to grab it, my finger brushed the glass surface. A dim light appeared. The mirror reflected a memory, as clear as a picture. I stood smiling with my scythe on my back and my arm around a very pretty girl. A red-haired woman with a large witch hat stood next to us. She was holding the leather-bound book. A short green imp in a tuxedo stood next to her with perfect posture. Behind all of us stood a giant of an old man with long white hair and a long white beard. He wore a leather eye patch over his left eye. A black and a white hawk sat perched on each of his broad muscular shoulders. On the other side of me in the picture, stood Father Philip and Sister Grace. They both stood strong and proud with their coffins strewn across their backs. In front of all of us sat Fenrir. On one side of Fenrir sat a cute brown cat, which wore the red ribbon with the golden bell attached. On the other side of Fenrir, resting its head on his shoulder, sat a beautiful white wolf with red eyes. "I'm doing this for you guys," I said confidently. I threw my green cloak over my shoulders and tied it tight. I looked down at the fish fiercely and winked. "Let me tell you about what happened after I became a church grim," I said proudly. Fenrir barked and we walked out of the front door.